Doctors see X-rays every day. Most reveal nothing unusual, just ordinary shadows and lines. But one image carried a weight that changed the air in the room. His voice narrowed into a quiet instruction as he asked the nurse to clear the space. Before we dive into the story, tell us where you're watching from. On that grayscale film, he saw something that didn't belong. An unwelcome shape that demanded urgent attention. The calm routine of the clinic was gone in an instant, replaced with the hum of quiet urgency. And yet, this day had started like any other. The morning began quietly, the light stretching across the kitchen in pale streaks. At the table, her small feet swung just above the floor while the spoon tapped against her cereal bowl. The taste of milk was faintly sweet, but she only moved the pieces around, not finishing. The scrape of the chair's wooden leg against the tile sounded louder than usual in the stillness. Her mother moved through the routine. Backpack open, permission slip tucked in, snacks arranged with practiced hands. She suggested a park visit after the appointment, then ice cream as a treat. The words usually woke a smile, but this time the little girl only gave a slow nod. Her cheeks looked washed out in the light, and when she said softly, "Just tired," her voice carried more weight than the phrase itself. For a moment, her mother paused, but then explained it away. Children grow quickly, mornings are hard, and fatigue often comes with nothing more than a restless night. On the short drive, the girl lingered on the sight of an ambulance gliding ahead, its red lights flashing silently. It slipped around a corner and was gone, but her eyes stayed fixed on where it had disappeared. Later, her mother would recall that moment and wonder if it had been meant as a warning, though at the time it passed without a word between them. The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic as the glass doors opened. Beige walls surrounded them, lined with posters no one really read. At the desk, the receptionist gave a small smile, and in that instant, the girl's hand clung tighter to her mother's. Inside the waiting room, she picked at the strap of her overalls, watching bubbles drift in the fish tank. Normally, she would have asked questions about the colors and sizes of the fish, but today her voice was still. Her mother took that silence for shyness, the kind children often have when the setting feels unfamiliar. When their names were called, the little girl hesitated. She looked down, then reached for her mother's hand again, their steps quiet as they followed the nurse into the hallway. The linoleum carried their echoes, growing sharper with each step. In just a moment, the waiting would give way to the exam room, a place that felt colder, stranger, and entirely its own world. The exam room greeted her with a chill that pressed against her arms. The paper stretched across the table crackled loudly when she climbed onto it, the sound tearing through the silence. She stared at the white sheet as if it might reveal a pattern, something to keep her mind occupied. Above her, the lights buzzed steadily, a thin hum that never let the quiet settle. She shifted and brushed her fingertips against the edge of the metal sink, then pulled them back quickly, as though half expecting it to burn. In the corner sat a tall scale in a cabinet with closed drawers, their shapes as imposing as unspoken rules. She tugged at the ties of the thin paper gown until they formed a knot she worked and reworked with restless hands. For a moment, she tilted her head and began to count the ceiling tiles, tracing the little holes with her eyes. 1, 2, 3. Losing track and starting again, her lips moving silently. When the nurse arrived, her words were soft, but the touch of the stethoscope was not. The metal disc pressed cold against her skin, drawing a sharp inhale. Light from the pen torch flashed across her vision, a brightness that lingered for a beat after the nurse withdrew it. Every sound seemed larger in this space. The rustle of sleeves, the snap of gloves, the scrape of a stool rolling into place. The sensations came one after another, sharp and unavoidable. She gripped her mother's hand tighter until her knuckles turned white. Only that warmth steadied her. When the doctor stepped in, he carried an easy smile, the kind designed to reassure. He asked simple questions. Was she tired? Did anything hurt? But she answered in short phrases. Her gaze never left the hand encircling hers. For all his calmness, she noticed how his eyes flicked, just once, toward the chart before drifting back. The room seemed to shrink then, every detail pressing closer. The paper beneath her legs, the steady lights above, the faint chemical smell clinging to the air. She pulled at the gown's edge, wishing it felt less stiff. wishing the hum would stop. What began as an ordinary checkup had gathered a quiet tension. The doctor's routine movements slowed as he reached for the next step. And soon another door would open, into a place filled with machinery, where silence gave way to a different sound entirely. The X-ray room carried a different weight, cooler and more mechanical than the space they had just left. In the center stood the machine, its frame tall, its arms suspended above the table like a watchful figure. The child paused, eyes scanning its shape with an unease she couldn't pin down. The technician greeted them with a steady kindness. She spoke gently, guiding her steps and placing her hands where they needed to be. The words were simple, but it was her calmness that mattered more. The little girl let herself be nudged into place, stiff on the metal surface. Then the machine stirred. A low whir began, faint but steady, spreading through the floor. She stiffened, listening. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried a weight, like a drum beat only she could feel. "Stay very still," the technician said. The instruction felt bigger than the words themselves. The order pressed against her fidgeting nature. She found her mother's face across the room, locked her gaze on it, and copied her stillness, trying to hold her breath without looking scared. The next moment was stranger still. The lead apron settled across her chest, cool and heavy, heavier than she had imagined. It pressed without warmth, anchoring her in place. The technician adjusted it, pulling the corners gently to shield her small frame. Then she slipped behind a wall, part of her visible but removed, watching from a distance. Now a red light blinked awake. The hum grew louder. She froze. The little girl clutched stillness as if it were a fragile object about to break. Inside her chest, the breath stayed caught, just as she'd been told. Her eyes widened, counting the seconds by the hum alone, measuring stillness against the pull to move. Click. The hum stopped. The light dimmed. The technician returned from the shadow, her smile soft but unreadable. She lifted the apron away and helped the child sit up. The cool of the floor met her bare feet when she slid down, relief rushing through her in one quiet exhale. To her, it seemed done. Another box ticked, another test completed. But in truth, something else had begun. The machine had taken its picture, but what it had seen wasn't for her to know yet. Not in that room. Not in that moment. Across the hall, its image waited quietly, while she and her mother were led back to the exam room, believing the hardest part was already behind them. Back in the exam room, the hum of the clinic carried on, steady and indifferent. The girl sat on the crinkling paper again, a coloring book open, but her crayon moving without much care. Her mother scrolled on her phone, the glow outlining her face in pale blue. The waiting felt ordinary at first. When the door opened, the doctor stepped in. His easy smile was gone. He didn't sit down. That alone altered the rhythm of the room. His questions came quickly. Has she mentioned trouble breathing? Any discomfort lying down? The tone was polite, still professional, but wound tighter than before. The girl looked up from her coloring, sensing the difference without knowing what had changed. Then his voice sank lower. He leaned slightly toward her mother, words meant for one set of ears only. The girl could not catch them, but she noticed the hush. She noticed how the phone, once so important a moment ago, now rested forgotten in her mother's lap. Her crayon hovered above the page. She listened, not to the words but to the rhythm. Adults whispered in short, clipped breaths. That was different. She pressed her lips together, unsure why the air felt heavier. The doctor straightened. He excused himself, saying he needed to check something, and slipped out. The door clicked softly behind him. Her mother's hand tightened on her shoulder, firmer than she realized. It was meant as comfort, but it revealed her own unease too. If this part resonates with you, leave a comment. It helps others feel seen. The quiet that followed was sharper. Hallway sounds faded, even though the clinic beyond their door went on as always. Inside, it felt as though the walls themselves had drawn closer, holding everything still. The mother fought the stirring in her chest. This wasn't panic. Not yet. It was the unsettled tug of instinct, as if the day's script had slipped a single step off track. She smoothed her daughter's hair, the motion automatic, but her hand lingered longer than necessary. The girl tilted her head. "Mom?" Her voice was small, uncertain. The answer never came, not fully. Just a squeeze of reassurance, the sort adults give when their own questions have no sure ground. The wait continued, but its nature had shifted. What had been routine was now tinted with unease. Each tick of the clock pressed harder into the silence. And so, when the door finally opened again, the pause that followed felt different. Something was coming back into the room. Something they hadn't expected to face. The doctor returned, not alone this time. In his hands, he carried a sheet of transparent film. Without a word, he crossed to the wall and slid it into the light box. A soft flicker. Then the glow behind it spread across the room, throwing the black and white image into sharp relief. There it was. The curve of ribs, the long line of her spine, the hazy outlines of lungs. Shapes familiar and expected. For a few seconds, it could have passed as routine. He began tracing each part aloud, calm and practiced. His finger moved across the screen, showing the expected landmarks. Then his hand stopped. Suspended midair, hovering over the center of her chest. Something that didn't belong. A shadow pressed wrong against the ordered lines of her body. Irregular, dense, alien to everything else. Not part of her. It sat close to what the doctor described as vital structures, lodged where no object should ever be. The stillness in the room grew heavier. The doctor did not raise his voice, but his rhythm changed. He spoke in fewer words now, his steps sharper as he moved between the light box and his chart. The actions were efficient, almost clipped, as if time mattered in a new way. His outward composure never broke, but each lean of his shoulder, each quick note on the clipboard, betrayed that the moment was far from ordinary. The little girl tugged slightly at her mother's arm, her gaze bouncing between the glowing screen and the adult studying it. To her, the X-ray was both fascinating and strange, like a secret drawing larger than herself. She did not understand why the grown-ups had fallen so quiet. Her mother's hand pressed into her shoulder, firmer than before. It was a gesture of protection that felt at once tender and inadequate. Her eyes were fixed on the shadow, her breath drawn tight against the weight of what it suggested. On the wall, the image stopped being just a medical scan. It rewrote the morning in a single instant. The signs, the fatigue, the pale skin, the too quiet breakfast, suddenly aligned with what glowed before them. What had been brushed aside now demanded a name. The child couldn't parse the details, but she felt the change in the atmosphere. The air itself seemed to hum, measured but urgent. Every movement, every word carried more weight, and though no one had spoken it aloud yet, the next steps were already being set into motion. The doctor turned toward the nurse, his voice steady but low. He spoke of preparing for transfer, arranging for transport. The words sounded ordinary, yet they carried an unmistakable weight. The nurse's face stayed calm, but her movements sharpened. Without a word, she left the room. The next instruction came quietly. Clear the room. His tone was even, almost gentle, but firm enough that no one mistook its meaning. It was framed as part of standard procedure, one used when focus and space were needed most. In that moment, the ordinary appointment was gone. He slipped into the hallway, pulling the door shut behind him. From inside, his voice was muffled, but certain phrases carried through the thin walls. Pediatric emergency. Foreign object. Urgent surgical consult. These were not pronouncements, but working descriptions traded between professionals. The mother caught them nonetheless, each fragment striking harder than the last. Her hand obeyed its own instinct, tightening around her daughter's. The child watched intently as the rhythm of the room shifted. What had been still now moved with intent. Staff passing, shoes scuffing quickly along the floor. A different nurse returned, this time bearing a blanket, soft and warm. She wrapped it gently around the girl's shoulders with a smile, kind yet hurried. The girl sensed both layers at once. Comfort for her, urgency beneath it. Her mother pressed for answers, her voice thinner than before. "What's happening?" she asked. The doctor re-entered and leaned low to her. His reply was even, measured. "We just need to be thorough." He left it there. The words were meant to reassure, but the faint tremble in her hand revealed they had not done so. The staff moved with practiced efficiency, each step aligned without the need for raised voices. Instructions were exchanged in brief tones. A hand brushed her mother's arm, a quiet anchor. Another touch settled the blanket again on the girl's lap. Small gestures, weaving steadiness into the room even while larger plans unfurled beyond it. The clinic walls felt smaller now, separating them from the distant noise of routine life. The waiting room magazines, the soft chatter outside, those belonged to another place. Here, urgency was present, but spoken softly, carried in clipped words and tightened gestures. And then the doctor turned his focus toward the mounted phone on the wall, his shoulders straight as he reached for the receiver. 3 digits changed everything. The sequence was simple, taught early in life and remembered easily, but never imagined as personal. The doctor pressed them in order, and with that act, the ordinary day shifted into its sharpest turn. The call connected at once. His tone was steady, but every syllable leaned forward, focused. He gave his name and the clinic's address, spelling it clearly. His words carried no wasted breath. "Urgent pediatric emergency," he said. "Foreign object in the chest. Immediate surgical support and transport required." His phrases were stripped down, each one carrying a weight the listener at the other end understood. This wasn't a warning, it was a direct request for action. He paused only to provide what mattered most: the child's age, her weight, brief but essential. These were the details that let others prepare before they even arrived. He listened, nodded once, and ended the call. The receiver returned to its cradle. Silence filled the room again, but it was no longer ordinary silence. It now carried the echo of what had just been spoken. The moment had changed. At first, the sound outside was faint, something you might mistake for wind in the distance. But it grew sharper, closer, a wail threading its way through the air. Sirens. Rising quickly, they filled every pause, every breath. They weren't passing on the highway or cutting through another neighborhood. They were here, closing in, meant for this room. The child's head lifted. Her eyes darted toward the door, then back to her mother, confused, frightened by the sudden noise that pressed through the walls. Her hands curled against the blanket around her shoulders. Her mother squeezed her hand, steady but firm, though her own face carried the pale strain of fear she could not hide. She whispered, not explanations, but comfort. Small words meant to anchor a child who sensed the weight of something bigger than her. Each second dragged under the sound. The sirens grew until they pressed close, wrapping the room in their restless cry. There was no separation between their world and that sound now. It belonged to them. And as the noise swelled at the edge of the building, the walls of the exam room seemed to narrow, waiting for the moment when help would step inside. In the rising tension, the nurse knelt so her face met the child's. Her voice was steady, carrying calm into the noise. She spoke about helpers who were coming soon, people whose job was to make sure she stayed safe. The words were brief, but in that moment, they were a lifeline. The child's lip quivered. The sound pressing through the walls was now a vibration under her feet and in the papered table beneath her. She didn't cry, but her eyes brimmed, round and searching for answers in the silence. Her small fingers clutched the blanket at her shoulders tighter. Beside her, her mother's hand stayed firm, wrapping hers with a strength that belied her own fear. She leaned close, her whispers plain. "You're doing so well." "I'm right here." Those few words, repeated softly, and the familiar touch of skin to skin gave the girl a thread of steadiness. In emergencies, ordinary gestures, hands, blankets, familiar words, become the anchors people cling to. The door opened quickly. One paramedic entered first, carrying a kit balanced at his side. His arrival startled the room, yet his controlled pace calmed it again. No rush, no raised voice, only clear purpose. The doctor stepped toward him, sharing details in clipped, measured tones. He outlined only what mattered most: the presence of a foreign object, the child's young age, her fragile condition. The words passed in seconds, concise yet complete. Another paramedic wheeled a gurney in and lowered it nearby. He moved close, crouching until he met the girl's cautious stare. "We'll take good care of you," he said, simple and sure. A thicker blanket was unfolded, wrapped gently around her as she was lifted from the paper-draped table to the waiting gurney. Her mother never let go of her hand. Even as the straps were secured and the blanket tucked in, that single grasp held. Around her formed a quiet net of support. The nurse adjusting a corner of the blanket, the paramedics guiding her onto the gurney, the doctor stepping back to allow the transition. Her mother's presence, constant throughout. Hands, voices, and routine steps, done with practiced care, stitched together safety in a moment that might have slipped into chaos. Together they moved toward the exit, a collective rhythm carrying her forward. What had begun in stillness was now set in motion, and the world outside waited for them, with its own demands. The ambulance doors closed with a muffled thud, and suddenly they were inside a new world. The beige walls and quiet hallways of the clinic were gone. Here, space was tight, lit by blinking panels, filled with clipped voices and the quiet strength of paramedics at work. The girl lay wrapped in her blanket, the straps holding her small body still. Her eyes stayed open, wide, but there were no tears now. Her mother sat inches away, one hand pressing against her daughter's leg, the other gripping the seat bar as if to tether herself against the motion. The cereal bowl, the morning drive, the waiting room, all of it felt distant, written over by this reality. Questions hung thick in her mind. How had something foreign ended up inside her child? Had it been swallowed without anyone noticing? Could it have sat unseen for days while she brushed off the pale cheeks and quiet nods? The answers mattered, but not now. The only question that mattered in that urgent space was, what happens next? A monitor blinked softly on the girl's finger, its rhythm reassuring in its steadiness. One paramedic leaned close to adjust it, his movements practiced and quiet. Across the small cabin, another gave terse updates into the radio. The siren outside wailed steadily, a signal clearing paths long before the ambulance reached them. Inside, life shrank to the hum of the engine, the beeping monitor, and the silent exchange of comfort between mother and child. This moment shows how quickly a normal day can shift into something rare and demanding. The small things, the pale skin, the fatigue, the glance that seemed unusual, were details easy to brush aside. Yet within those details was the truth that turned an ordinary checkup into an emergency. The doctor's sharp eyes, the calm movements of the nurse, and now the measured steps of the paramedics formed a chain of care, each link holding the situation steady. For the mother, there was both fear and release in that chain. Fear in facing the unknown, yes, but also relief that the unknown no longer sat silent and hidden. It had been named, seen, and met with action. The outcome was yet uncertain, but the story had turned toward hope. The child was no longer just a patient in a clinic. She was now wrapped in capable hands, carried forward toward the hospital, where the next steps were waiting. And in those hands, the first signs of quiet courage began to show. The story closes here, but its images stay with us. The mother's steady hand, the nurse kneeling low, the paramedic's quiet reassurance. These ordinary gestures show how care often reveals itself in the smallest of movements. It's a reminder that the attentive eyes and routine habits of medical teams often catch what families cannot anticipate, turning an unnoticed detail into a decisive moment. If this moved you, share it with someone who notices the quiet signs. If you want more stories like this, subscribe so you don't miss the next one.